The garden had always been Gerald Hoff's excuse to avoid his wife's book club. Every Saturday morning, while Miriam entertained 3 other women who came to dissect novels, Gerald pulled on his rubber boots and disappeared into the narrow strip of earth behind their semi-detached house. He grew nothing remarkable: a few courgettes, some rows of runner beans, and mint that kept escaping its pot. But the digging itself was the point: the resistance of the clay soil, the clean smell of turned earth, the satisfying thud of the spade. It was the 3rd Saturday of October when the spade hit something that wasn't a stone. Gerald had learned to distinguish the sounds: the flat crack of flint, the dull thud of a buried root, the hollow clunk of an old clay pipe. This was none of those. It was a bright, almost musical ring that traveled up the handle into his palms, and it stopped him completely. He crouched and worked the soil away with his fingers, the way he'd seen archaeologists do it on television. About 6 inches down, the dirt gave up a small oval object, dark with tarnish, hanging on what appeared to be a chain so fine he'd nearly mistaken it for a root. He wiped it on his trousers, held it up to the gray October light, and felt the first strange shiver of something he couldn't yet name. Miriam held the necklace under the kitchen tap, rubbing gently with her thumb, and the tarnish gave way to reveal a dull gold luster and the unmistakable shape of an oval pendant, roughly the size of a 2-pound coin. On one face, a small inlaid stone, deep red, possibly garnet, surrounded by a border of tiny raised dots. On the reverse, markings that might have been letters, or might have been something older than letters. "Take it to someone," Miriam said, setting it down on the draining board. On Monday, Gerald took it to Ackerman & Son on Parliament Street, the kind of shop that still had a bell above the door and velvet pads in the window. He'd bought Miriam's engagement ring there 26 years earlier, from the father. Now it was the son, David Ackerman, in his 50s, half-moon glasses, with the careful, unhurried manner of a man who had spent his life handling other people's precious things. Gerald set the pendant on the glass counter and said nothing, curious to see what a professional would make of it. Ackerman picked it up. He turned it once. Then he set it down, removed his glasses, and looked at Gerald with an expression that wasn't quite what Gerald had expected. Not the polite curiosity of a man assessing a trinket, but something considerably more guarded. "Where did you get this?" Ackerman asked. His voice was level, but the stillness that followed made Gerald stand a little straighter. Gerald explained. Ackerman listened without interruption, which was itself unusual. In Gerald's experience, jewelers talked constantly, filling silence with valuations and reassurances. Ackerman said nothing until Gerald had finished. Then he asked if he could take the pendant to the back. Gerald waited at the counter for nearly 15 minutes. Through the half-open door, he could hear the faint tick of instruments being set down, the rustle of what might have been reference books. When Ackerman returned, he was carrying a jeweler's loop and a sheet of paper on which he'd written nothing. "The chain is 18-karat gold," he said, "which isn't particularly old or unusual. But the pendant is something different." He set the loop on the counter. The metalwork on the border, those raised dots, that's called granulation, a very specific technique. Some ancient artisans used it, and it was largely lost after the fall of Rome. It reappeared briefly in the early 19th century, when there was a fashion for archaeological jewelry, largely driven by a Roman goldsmith named Castellani. He paused. "But this doesn't look like a Castellani reproduction. The granulation is too irregular, done by hand without modern tools." "How old is it?" Gerald asked. Ackerman considered his answer with visible care. "That is precisely what we may have to find out," he said. The concern, Ackerman explained, wasn't about age alone. If the pendant were merely old Victorian, say, or even Georgian, he could have offered an evaluation and sent Gerald on his way. The issue was the combination of features: the granulation technique, the inlaid stone, which under the loop appeared to be not garnet, but polished carnelian, a stone favored in Mediterranean antiquity, and the markings on the reverse, which Ackerman tentatively identified as not letters at all, but a series of symbols resembling early Etruscan script. "I want to be careful here," Ackerman said. "I'm a jeweler, not an archaeologist. I could be wrong. The piece could be a later imitation. There were fashions for this sort of thing in the 1800s, and some of the reproductions were extraordinarily good." He picked up the pendant again, tilting it under his bench lamp. "But if it isn't an imitation, and it's been sitting 6 inches beneath your garden in Harrogate for some considerable time, then it raises questions I'm not qualified to answer." Gerald asked what he should do. "Don't sell it," Ackerman said immediately. And it was the speed of the answer that stayed with Gerald, walking back through town with the pendant in his coat pocket, a flat, immediate instruction delivered with the gravity of a man who had seen something he did not wish to be responsible for mishandling. Gerald was not a man who read significance into things. He'd spent 30 years as a civil engineer. He believed in observable data, calculations, the dull reliability of facts. But that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the pendant under Miriam's reading lamp, he found himself affected by it in a way he couldn't rationalize. The craftsmanship was, even to his untrained eye, extraordinary. Each tiny granule on the border was perfectly spherical, no larger than a grain of sand, fixed to the surface with no visible solder. He'd looked up Castellani after leaving the shop, and the reproduction jewelry from that period had a certain self-consciousness to it, a slightly too perfect quality, work made to impress. This was something else. It had an unguardedness to it, as if it had been made not to demonstrate skill, but simply because the maker knew no other way to work. Miriam sat across from him, reading nothing, watching him. "You're going to follow this up," she said. It wasn't a question. Gerald contacted the Yorkshire Museum the next morning. The finds liaison officer, a brisk, practical woman named Dr. Sarah Okafor, agreed to see him within the week. When she arrived, she examined the pendant with the controlled focus of someone accustomed to not revealing what she was thinking until she was certain. Then she set it down, folded her hands, and told him that under the Treasure Act 1996, he was likely obliged to report the find. "Why likely?" Gerald asked. "That depends," she said, "on what it actually is." What followed was 6 months of patience, which Gerald had, and bureaucratic uncertainty, which Miriam had less tolerance for. The pendant went to the government's portable antiquities team for analysis. A metallurgist, a classicist, and a specialist in pre-Roman Mediterranean trade objects were all, at various points, involved. Gerald received official letters in formal language that committed to very little. But in March, Dr. Okafor rang rather than wrote, and her voice had a different quality. The analysis had confirmed that the metal was consistent with Etruscan alloy compositions from roughly the 5th to the 3rd centuries BC. The carnelian stone was of a type sourced from the Eastern Mediterranean. The granulation technique matched examples held in Florence and the Vatican collections. A university epigrapher was assessing the symbols on the reverse, but preliminary indications suggested a dedication or an ownership inscription, the kind placed on objects of personal significance. "We're not calling it definitively Etruscan," she said carefully, "but the balance of evidence is strongly suggestive." Gerald sat with this. Then he asked the question that had been circling since October. How does an Etruscan pendant end up 6 inches under a garden in Harrogate? "That," Dr. Okafor said, "is the part that interests us most. It isn't impossible. Roman legions moved objects extraordinary distances, and there was significant trade through what is now York. But 6 inches is very shallow for something this old to have survived in agricultural soil. It may not have been there as long as it appears." The epigrapher's report arrived in April. The inscription on the reverse appeared to read, "For Thania, beloved who goes before, a morning dedication." Unlike the technical findings, this felt personal. Someone had lost someone, and had given that loss a physical form that endured long after both people were gone. Miriam read the report quietly. "Someone buried it," she said. "They didn't drop it. 6 inches is deliberate." Gerald agreed. The chain had been folded neatly, suggesting intention. Someone had placed it there, on purpose, raising questions of when and why. Dr. Okafor soon confirmed discussions with the North Yorkshire Archaeology Unit about a possible survey. Miriam agreed immediately. The survey took place over 2 weekends in June. A small team used ground-penetrating radar, working carefully across the garden. On the second afternoon, they identified a circular disturbance in the soil at a depth of 40 to 80 centimeters. It could be natural, but it could also indicate a deliberate burial. "What do we do now?" Gerald asked. "It becomes an excavation question," the team leader replied. Permissions took months. By October, a year after the discovery, the excavation began. Soil was removed layer by layer, carefully sifted. For 3 days, nothing. On the 4th morning, something emerged. 5 objects were uncovered. A small, intact ceramic vessel, identified as Etruscan ware. A thin bronze mirror, corroded but complete, later identified as depicting 2 women at a loom. 2 turquoise beads associated with Egyptian trade goods, and a worked bone fragment, possibly a pin. No human remains were found. The inquest under the Treasure Act concluded the following spring. The objects were declared treasure, transferring ownership to the state. The Yorkshire Museum expressed interest in acquiring them. Dr. Okafor described the find as significant. The valuation when it arrived was substantial. The excavation site had been filled in and leveled, new grass already growing, and yet the place held something unseen, an intention carried across centuries. Someone had chosen this spot. For reasons no one would ever fully recover, across a distance of more than 2,000 years, someone had decided that this was where something precious should rest. Gerald thought that, in its own way, was enough.